I've ever seen. And Tom, I am so proud that you joined us. And I want to talk, first of all, about a horse, a particular horse named Joe Hancock. And I want you to tell me where he came
Well, I've heard of that horse, Fred, and he was foaled in the Texas Panhandle, south of Perryton, about 20 miles, right on the north side of the Canadian River. That's where he came from.
And how was he bred?
He was out of what history says was Peter McHugh's fastest offspring, a horse called John Wilkins.
And who was the fellow that raised him?
Well, the fellow that raised that horse happened to be my dad.
Now, you told me a story about how your dad got that horse to Montague County from up in the Panhandle.
Mm-hmm. My dad fell in love with his colt, and when he had left the Panhandle, he had 2 or 3 work teams and a saddle horse or 2 and a brood mare or 2. And he didn't take them to Nocona when he went to Nocona. And it's 300 miles,
Right.
dirt road, gravel and dirt. And so he knew he'd probably never get them to Nocona. But he also figured out that he could maybe haul that colt to Nocona. So he propositioned Grandpa, Paul said, probably never get all of my horses home, but I really like this colt, and I can borrow a trailer from the neighbor over here.
And he almost didn't get to keep that horse as a stallion, did he?
That's right. Dad only kept 1 stud in all those years, and he nearly didn't keep him. He called the veterinarian when the horse got to be 2-year-old, called the veterinarian, local vet, out to cut him. And the vet told Dad, he said, well, Joe said, we're ready. But he said, I'll tell you, he said, I've never cut a horse like this. He said, in fact, I've never seen a horse like this. And my dad thought a minute, and he said, well, just take it off. So he came awful close to being a gelding.
He raced him a lot, didn't he? He loved to run him.
Yes, sir, he did. He, of course, he come from a racehorse family, and they broke the colt tire, he and my older brother, and they knew he could run. Didn't know how much, but he could run.
Well, and then your dad sold him. Tell us that story.
After they retired him, George Ogles came over one day, and he was the last man that trained him. He come over and visited. At a given time, he asked Daddy what he would take for old Joe. Well, Daddy didn't want to sell him, and he told him straight up, didn't want to sell him. They talked a little while. Sometime during the afternoon, well, George was still there, and Daddy was thinking all this time, and sure enough, George jumped him again and said, well, Mr. Hancock said, there's something, price that horse. Hell, there's something you'd take for him, And Daddy said he had been thinking about it. He said, I think I know what I'll do to get rid of this boy. I'll just price him so Dan high. And his byword was D-A-N, Dan. He said, I'll just price him so Dan high that this boy will go to house, And that was in 1931, Depression. And he asked Daddy, and Daddy said, well, I'll take $1,000. He said, George just reached in his pocket. He had a lot more than that in it, and just paid him. So there wasn't nothing he could do, and the rest of that story is George didn't need him either. George wasn't a horse breeder, and he couldn't race him, but George was with the horse all these years, and Tom Burnett that owns the 4-6s and the Triangle Ranches, Daddy didn't know him, but George did. He knew everybody. And Tom Burnett had told George if he could get him bought, he'd give him $2,000 for him. So actually, George, the man that bought him, just hauled him, I guess it's about 60 miles to Highway Park from Nocona. He just hauled him up there and unloaded him, and made 1,000.
Picked up $1,000. And he went on to be the most important sire in the entire history of the Quarter Horse Association.
Well, he's one of the big boys.
Well,
and a lot of people think, now I'm a little bit prejudiced.
It's all right.
No, I'm probably a bunch prejudiced, you know.
Good.
But yeah, I was telling my son coming down here, I went through a list of horses, and they don't have Hancock in their name, but he's probably in more good horses pedigree as any other horse. And I've read where people, historians have already written. Now, Peter McHugh was a hell of a horse. And John Wilkins wasn't that famous except for Old Joe.
Right.
But Old Joe wasn't the only thing he ever produced. But I've heard it said that by different historians read it, that he really outproduced, and he's still doing it, that he really outproduced Peter McHugh and his daddy. Yeah, he's influential.
Tom, thank you so much for coming to see us. And it's always a pleasure visiting with you. And I know it's quite a ways from Montague County to the Bunkhouse, but thank you for coming.
I thoroughly enjoyed being here, and I'll come back anytime.
All right, partner, thank you. You folks stop by your local newsstand and pick up the latest edition of Cowboys and Indians magazine. It brings you the beauty, the drama, and the grandeur of the American West. Hang on, we're coming right back.